Hello and welcome aboard. My name's Mike Bannister. I'm the Chief Concorde pilot at British Airways. This is the flight deck of Concorde, the world's only supersonic airliner, the most advanced aircraft in the world, the only way that you and I can fly at twice the speed of sound. Come with me in this program. We're going to show you some marvelous shots, some unique footage. We're going to show you some of the things that Concorde has done throughout the years and tell you about her future. This is going to be a metaphorical flight that will take you to the edge of space, where the sky gets darker, where you can see the curvature of the Earth. It's going to be the ride of a lifetime. Join me today, and hopefully join me aboard one time in the future.
Few aircraft in the world still turn heads as much as Concorde. With her unique mix of technical innovation and evocative, even sensual design, Concorde remains a paradox in today's world of civil aviation. Still capable of outperforming any other civil or military aircraft, Concorde remains undisputedly the world's greatest airliner.
So here we are, standing in front of one of the British Airways 7 Concordes, this one GBOAC. Concordes are listed from AA through to AG, or Alpha Alpha to Alpha Golf, and GBOAC, or Alpha Charlie as we call her, is, if you like, the flagship of the flagships because she's got the letters of our forerunner airline BOAC. And I'm standing right next to a spare Olympus 593 engine, a Rolls-Royce Snecma engine. And this is one of the three key technical things about this wonderful airplane. There's many people that make her fly and many wonderful technical aspects, but three key things that I'd just like to take you through as we prepare for that flight to New York. This is one of them, the Olympus engine, used on many other different things around the world, but this particular version has reheat or afterburner, and we use that for takeoff and acceleration through the sound barrier to take Concorde supersonic. At takeoff, it has 38,000 pounds of thrust, about the same as 6,000 family cars, and can accelerate us from a standstill to 250 miles an hour in around 40 seconds, or, when we're at lightweight, even faster than a Formula One race car. That's the airplane, that's the engine that enables us to get up and away, set off faster even than a subsonic jet on our way towards the point where we start accelerating to supersonic speeds. So right here, just behind Concorde's main wheels, are the engine intakes. That little engine sits behind this enormous intake. There's a pair of engines behind this intake pack here, and these are very special because as we travel along at twice the speed of sound, 1,350 miles an hour, we've got to slow the air down to a mere 500 miles an hour in just 11 feet. That's the speed that the engines can accept that air, and to do that, we move these panels that are marked of danger up above us up and down to create shock waves inside the intake and slow the air down. And the positioning of those panels is absolutely crucial. It's accomplished by computers designed by a British company way back in the 60s, and the computers that were devised to do that were a real breakthrough in aviation. If there's one thing that made Concorde successful, where the American and the Russian versions weren't, it was the computer that positions those intakes, enables us to fly supersonically for up to 3 hours at a stretch. And the third and final really important element is the wing. The very special features on the wing that keep our center of gravity in just the right place. Apart from the ability to store fuel, Concorde's wing is totally different from a conventional aeroplane, and so are the flying controls. An ordinary aircraft has ailerons, a rudder and elevators. Concorde has a rudder, but the ailerons and the elevator are combined into what we call an elevon to give pitch and roll control. They're right at the back of the wing. They're drooped down right now because there's no power on the airplane. But when she's powered up, they're smooth, flush and in total alignment, streamlining Concorde for high-speed flight. Also, the wing gives us some very interesting shapes, not only for supersonic flight and for the aerodynamics we need, but also to give us the ability to control the balance of Concorde. To keep her in trim, we pump fuel from a tank right at the front of the airplane to a tank right at the back, to balance the movement of lift as we go faster and faster. But the very clever shape of the wing stops that lift moving too much. Without it, we wouldn't be able to balance Concorde and keep her in trim, and we wouldn't be able to fly supersonically. So those are the three things that are really important technically. The three things that enable her to fly day in and day out to New York, just like she's going to do right now. Here she comes now, right on time, and Captain Chris Norris and the rest of the crew are completing the checks before takeoff. As she taxis into place, the final before takeoff checks, and talking to London Air Traffic Control, getting clearance for departure. Any moment now, he's going to open up the 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus engines to full power and the reheats will cut in. 3, 2, 1, now! Here she comes. You can hear the roar increasing as she accelerates through 150 miles an hour. And she rotates and lift off. Concorde climbing away to New York. She'll be there in just over 3 hours.
Shortly after takeoff, whilst climbing at a rate of 2,000 feet per minute, the crew undertake the noise abatement procedure.
3, 2, 1, noise.
This involves cutting the power by 15% and switching off the engine reheats, helping to reduce the noise for those living underneath the flight path.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, Captain Chris Norris, cruising along now 26,000 feet at just under the speed of sound. We're estimating arrival in New York, touching down around 10 minutes past 9, just over 3 hours from now, the time in New York, 5 past 6.
Once clear of the coastline, Captain Chris Norris engages full power once more, whilst the flight engineer applies the reheats in pairs. Firstly, the inboard pair on engines 2 and 3, followed by the outboard pair on engines 1 and 4. At this point, the passengers will have noticed 2 slight nudges in the back of their seats as the extra raw power kicks in, helping Concorde accelerate towards the sound barrier at Mach 1. As the aircraft passes the speed of sound, the only indication on board to identify the change of status from subsonic to supersonic comes in the form of a horizontal indicator, flickering as it picks up the shockwave off the nose as the plane passes Mach 1.
The pleasure of this being a job of work that we do is that I think we all, without question, enjoy coming to work to fly this aeroplane. I'm not sure that all airline crew could say that. We certainly all very much enjoy flying the aeroplane. We look upon it as being paid to enjoy ourselves, although don't tell British Airways that. I think that until recently we weren't quite the highest people on the planet because there was the Mir station which had astronauts up in space. But now that that is no longer there, the people on this aeroplane today are actually the people furthest above the planet, and every time we fly the aeroplane, of course, that is the case. Our position at the moment is that we're at 45 degrees north and 57 degrees west. That means that we are to the south of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia in Canada. We obviously choose a routing that keeps us over the sea because that means we can stay supersonic all the way to our final descent into New York. The routing that we've done to achieve that is to take off out of London and fly subsonically towards the Bristol Channel, and then when we get to the south of Wales we become clear of the coastline. We can accelerate the aeroplane and climb it up. We have two set routings which take us to New York, or one that takes us to New York and one that brings us back again. There's no need to vary the tracks on a day-to-day basis because the winds up here are almost insignificant compared with our speed, so we always use the same routings. We fly along that routing. We have the height from 50 to 60,000 feet to ourselves, so we do what's called a cruise climb. And at the moment the aeroplane is actually climbing very slowly, 56,200, because there is nobody else up here to get in our way. So we just leave the engines on full cruise power and allow the aeroplane to gradually climb up as it gets lighter.
For the seasoned transatlantic subsonic traveller, it's almost inconceivable that a mere 2 hours after leaving London and already the aircraft is passing Newfoundland and northeast Canada, providing a sharp reminder, if one were needed, of Concorde's staggering performance. In order to avoid creating a sonic boom over land, Concorde is deliberately flown on a longer, more southerly course out to sea, passing a long, narrow sand spit called Sable Island.
The restriction coming into New York is that we have to be subsonic before we cross the coast, but we in fact choose to do a routing that keeps us off the coast right until we get to Kennedy Airport, so we can stay supersonic right up until the point where we have to start slowing down in order to make our landing at Kennedy Airport. And the way we slow down is whatever height we've got to on the Atlantic crossing, we hold that height, bring the speed back to about 1.5 times the speed of sound, and then we start descending and also continue slowing up back to the realms of subsonic flight, where we mix in with the other subsonic aeroplanes and become just like any other aeroplane landing at Kennedy Airport, controlled by air traffic in New York.
As Chris Norris's flight from London is tracked down the US coastline in preparation for landing at New York, its controllers are already in the process of handling another 3 Concorde flights in and out of Kennedy Airport. In fact, a combination of Air France's 2 Concorde flights, in addition to BA's 2, result in JFK playing host to more of these extraordinary airliners than anywhere else in the world.
Kennedy Airport, Air France, Concorde 001. Air France 002, heavy Kennedy Tower, runway 31 left.
I mean, they got them for...
Speedbird 1, heavy side, heading 350.
And 350.
In order to give the pilots a better view of the approaching airfield, the co-pilot lowers the nose and visor 10 miles out from JFK. As flight BA1 from London nears the end of its journey, another Concorde flight BA2 prepares to depart JFK for London on the opposite runway.
Speedbird 2 Heavy after departure, fly to Canarsie, climb. Sorry about the wait. Wind 02010, runway 31 left from the intersection, clear for takeoff.
Canarsie climb, Speedbird Concorde 2, clear for takeoff, 31 left.
Paca 580, Kennedy Tower, caution wake turbulence, departing Concorde, runway 31 left, taxi into positional. Next arrival is 13 miles out.
Puts you on a hold, 31 left, back up 80.
Speedbird 2 flying to Canarsie, climb noise abatement. 454 Alpha Echo, you exit in the area to the northwest rate of service terminated. Squawk 1200, frequency change approved, good day.
The American 1832 is a visual 31 left.
American 1832, couple of departures prior to you, runway 31 left, clear to land and wind 030 at 11.
From land 31 left, American 1832.
To avoid the many residential areas that surround Kennedy Airport, all aircraft, including Concorde, are required to approach and depart the airport via predefined routes. On this morning, as the wind changed from a northerly to an easterly direction, Chris Norris and his crew were told to position their Concorde onto the Canarsie approach, where aircraft have to undertake a spectacular right-hand sweep before rolling out onto finals at the last minute. As the aircraft touches down at some 180 miles per hour, a combination of reverse thrust on the 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus engines and powerful brakes brings the Concorde to a mere walking pace in a matter of 30 seconds.
Concorde 1 heavy turn left is taxi, taxi into your ramp, monitor ground 121.9, good morning.
Okay, left here into the ramp 1219, bye-bye.
A mere 3 hours and 13 minutes from London, and today's passengers already have the Big Apple in their sights. Insomuch as the Big Apple is undisputedly a city of contrasts, so too can be the weather in late summer. After weeks of sunshine, a deep low-pressure system brings with it a day of torrential rain. Testing conditions for one of Air France's supersonic jets, landing in bad visibility on a soaking runway after its morning flight from Paris Charles de Gaulle. In conditions like this, airport staff are out in force to check water levels on the web of complicated taxiways around JFK.
9-5, Grant.
On Fox, across 4 left.
Ground 1 Air France Concorde 002. We're now approaching Alpha.
Out of the rain in the British Airways operations room in the basement of BA's terminal, crew and controllers discuss the conditions outside and what effect, if any, they might have on the day's flights. Most modern aircraft, including Concorde, are well equipped with anti-skid brakes, the surrounding damp runways posing few operational problems for today's flight crew. As the rain passes, Chris Norris and his crew head back to London, making a quick left-hand turn after takeoff to avoid noise-sensitive housing straight ahead towards Manhattan.
That departure from 31 left at New York is spectacular in those conditions, but it's really very, very exciting in any condition. Perhaps the most complicated procedure that any civil aircraft flies as a departure. That's because we want to be good neighbours in New York. New York is the busiest airport for Concorde, and we want to make sure that we're environmentally friendly. And to do that, just as soon as we're airborne, we turn out over Jamaica Bay, and we climb up to cross over the bridges there with our power cut back. Put a bit more power on, cross over the rockaways with the power back again before we start accelerating out towards supersonic speeds. That's not something that ordinary line pilots can do straight away, so they come here to the simulator at Bristol. The manufacturers of the airplane are based here to learn how to fly that particular procedure. It's part of the conversion course, and we do it regularly on our check routines that every pilot and flight engineer go through every 6 months. So here we are in the simulator, a perfect view of New York. Of course, that's computer generated, but the simulator is identical to the airplane, and we're going to show you just the sort of things we do to be good neighbours at New York. So, get yourself strapped in. Here we are sitting on the end of the runway, maximum takeoff weight of 182 tons, a beautiful day, and we're going to set off for London. But first, the noise abatement procedure. So off come the brakes. 3, 2, 1, now. We open the throttles up and slam them open. It's just a computer input. The reheats light up. The airplane starts to accelerate. At 182 tons, the acceleration is already better than probably your motor car. We're traveling at 75 miles an hour, starting to increase speed towards the point where we're going to check the engines are functioning correctly. That's 100 knots, power checked. As we continue to go on up towards the speed where we make a decision to commit to the takeoff, that's called V1. Here we are coming up to that speed now, V1, and approaching the speed where we'll rotate the airplane to the climb-out attitude. As rotate's called, I pull back on the control column, pitching Concorde up to about 13 degrees. Shortly after that, we're airborne, positive climb, gear up, turn, roll on 25 degrees of bank. You get an excellent view out of the left-hand side of the aircraft right here as we turn out over the Jamaica Bay, sometimes seeing even the little fishing boats. Accelerating up to 250 knots as we approach the noise time. 3, 2, 1, noise, reduce the power and switch off the reheats, cross over the bridge, and there we are, tippy-toeing out of New York, being really friendly and good neighbours.
The busiest time of day at Kennedy Airport is generally in the afternoon and evening, but all the Concorde movements are between the hours of 8 and 9:30 in the morning. At the BA terminal, with champagne on ice, the smoked salmon and caviar loaded, the BA2 is almost ready for her passengers before being pushed back for the departure to London. Meanwhile, Air France's Paris-bound Concorde departure is already negotiating the web of complex taxiways at Kennedy, which will lead her towards the departing runway this morning. As the number of subsonic flights waiting to depart from another runway increases, thanks to noise restrictions, both the BA and Air France Concorde have been allocated the empty 3-1 left runway, ensuring a right-time departure, whilst everybody else is having to line up. At last, it's the turn of an American Airlines Boeing 767 departure for London, a journey that will take over 6 hours. Meanwhile, BA's Concorde passengers are settling back in their seats on flight BA2, which will touch down at Heathrow 3 hours earlier than the American 767, which is already departed when it is nearly halfway across the Atlantic. With the nose and visor down, the crew undertake a complex checklist, checking everything from electrical systems to the flying controls. Meanwhile, the passengers aboard the neighbouring BA Jumbo, also shortly to depart for London, can only look on with envy at Concorde's sleek lines as she glides past majestically prior to her supersonic soiree across the Atlantic in a fraction of the time it takes everybody else. Meanwhile, with 2 departing Concordes to Paris and London, a third is getting ready to touch down on the BA1 from London, landing just after the inbound Air France 002 from Paris, which is followed all the way across the Atlantic at Mach 2. With only 12 Concordes in the world, it's a strange thought that a quarter of the worldwide fleet of this extraordinary aircraft are under power at the same time at the same airport most days of the year. JFK produces many an opportunity to see both airlines' fleets at the same time. With the prevailing wind from the north, departing traffic is taking off to the northeast. Here, a BA Concorde waits for a departing TWA aircraft to cross its path before controllers temporarily halt the traffic flow to let Concorde cross. After a series of left-hand turns, she will commence her supersonic acceleration out to sea and will not see land again until she passes the southern coast of Ireland near Shannon. Meanwhile, back in London, sister aircraft Alpha Delta prepares for a special training flight to Shannon. Twice a year, Concorde flies to either Châteauroux in France or, in this case, to the southern Irish town for a week of training. With no hostesses on board, senior training captain Les Brodie finds himself in unfamiliar territory in the forward galley. It's up to the flight deck crew to forage for themselves on these flights. On board, the training crew, consisting of flight engineer Ian Fellows-Freeman, Captain Jeff Mussett and colleague Andy Barnwell, prepare for the short flight to Shannon. Back in the passenger cabin, 5 newcomers to the fleet take their seats on the aircraft for the first time. By the end of the ensuing week, they will be hoping to swap the leather-clad passenger seats at the back for the coveted prize, a seat at the controls. With the runway in sight, excitement builds amongst the new recruits embarking on this supersonic conversion course, with their days of flying rather ordinary 757s and lumbering jumbos hopefully soon over. After a sporty, lightweight takeoff more akin to a space shuttle at Cape Canaveral than a commercial airliner at Heathrow, the enthusiasm amongst the new recruits resembles a class of overexcited schoolchildren on a special end-of-term outing, rather than a group of highly professional pilots. Concorde, it would seem, can bring out the boy in everyone. Keeping the speed back to a leisurely 95% of the speed of sound, it's not long before the aircraft enters Irish airspace, and it's time for Ian Fellows-Freeman to start balancing the aircraft by pumping fuel from one tank to another. As Andy Barnwell steadily manoeuvres the plane down the glide slope, Shannon's ground crew prepare for the imminent arrival of this VIP visitor. Shannon will be Concorde Alpha Delta's home for the next 4 days as the new recruits take to the skies, flying circuits, practicing those all-important landings, which can't be simulated to the fidelity required on the simulator in Bristol.
Hotel that built again.
They start off in the ground school learning all about the technical systems of the aircraft, which is vital for further understanding for when they get on the simulator. And we're spending time with them down in Bristol, so we get to know them quite well. The thrilling part, of course, is when they actually get onto the aircraft for the first time, which is what we're doing at the moment. We call this base flying, and both the pilots and the flight engineers fly on the aircraft for the first time, but without passengers. And to see their enthusiasm really rubs off on us. So I think we're all pretty excited by the time we get here.
It's a moment we've been looking forward to for a very long time.
Well, it puts into real life things that you've just been studying in the classroom. You've never sat in the airplane, you've never sat in the seat before, and to look at it and feel at home just reflects how good the course is. You understand the systems, you've flown the simulator, and you sit in the seat, you even know where to go for the seat catches. Feels familiar. But then, of course, when you start the engine and the thing actually gets underway, you get all the senses that you're not used to, the noise and the acceleration that the simulator can't actually show you.
The passenger sits there in comfort and is aware, certainly, of the noises on takeoff. I think they still feel that as much as we do. But very soon, as far as they're concerned, it's now an airline, and it's just trotting along, and they're sitting there in comfort, reading the papers. For us, it's a fast jet front, an airliner main cabin. And that's the really unique thing about it. They've made something which is not only fast and powerful and furious, but it's also extremely beautiful to look at as well. So I think an image that everybody holds in their minds of Concorde is Concorde on the approach. Great big sort of stick manta sort of image. There's this one coming down with a long nose out at the front, bent down. You hear it going now. It's a tremendous sound. Just hear the roar, it's fantastic, isn't it? It's a really powerful roar. Tremendous sight. Absolutely stunning.
I think it's fair to say that we do attract enthusiasts. I think people, they've got to want to fly the aircraft. The course is very long. Regular route destinations are fairly limited, but that doesn't seem to matter if you're enthusiastic, because you basically want to fly the aeroplane. So perhaps it's not everyone's cup of tea, but the nice thing is that we do get people coming on the course who have probably wanted to do it for a long time. And that is a very strong motivational force. And when they actually get on the aircraft, flying regularly, and they've got the confidence, it's probably even outstripped their ideas of what it was going to be like.
The first impression is a very valuable moment that I think all of us will cherish. It's fortunately quite a lightweight takeoff, so there's a lot of spare thrust, a lot of excess power, and it certainly accelerates extremely fast, and I'll always be left with that memory of the first takeoff. A lot of vibration, a lot of noise, a lot of very rapid acceleration and very rapid climb, up to 250 knots in a very short space of time. Now, to compare that with military aircraft that I've flown in the past, it's on a par with a lot of them, actually. Yes, if you get a military fast jet at very lightweight, it's probably more sprightly than this. But heavyweight, it's on a par with the Tornadoes and Jaguars and Harriers I've flown in the past. And it reminded me very much of those as well. The vibrations that you get through the airframe, the smell of hot metal which you get from the reheat system, all those things are just like the fast jets that I've flown before. And I really felt at home. I thought, yes, I've come back to a fast jet.
Given the enormity of the task ahead of them, these new recruits could be forgiven for missing the beautiful scenery below. A visit to the historic 13th century Bunratty Castle will have to wait until the real work is over. Flying Concorde in tight circuits, time after time, requires skill and immense concentration.
After returning from base training at Shannon comes the really interesting part. Flying the aircraft and doing what she was designed to do. Operating between London and New York with business passengers crossing the Atlantic faster than the Earth rotates.
There's no question it saves not just the hours of the day, it saves the days of the week by making day one an effective one on the other side of the Atlantic.
Really, I suppose everybody was a businessman in one sense or another. Either they were businessmen in the sense that you and I would think about it, or they were sports stars, actors, pop stars, people to whom time was money.
Then you come back on day two, midday, arrive 10 o'clock in the evening, Europe time, and go to work on day three back in Europe. Marvellous.
In the early 1980s, with a fleet of 7 Concordes available for essentially one route to New York, it became clear that there was plenty of spare capacity in the fleet for new and innovative ideas to develop.
We've got a history of flying many special flights in the past all over the world. We've been to over 250 destinations, including 72 in the United States. We've also used Concorde in the flagship role. And those activities have seen us going to interesting places like Boston for the Ryder Cup, where the authorities were so helpful and really pleased to see us. I was absolutely delighted to be involved in flying Concorde in the flagship role. In particular when we flew her to celebrate the state opening of the Scottish Parliament in 1999. Flying down Princess Street, over Her Majesty, but then on and beyond to Glasgow, Greenock, and back round over the Forth Bridge. Some fantastic shots on a really wonderful and memorable day. That's when Concorde's at her best, flying, being looked at by all the people that love seeing this beautiful aircraft in the sky.
Back in the 1970s, BA operated a regular, if short-lived service to Singapore via Bahrain. Since its suspension in the 1980s, visits to the Middle East have been seldom. The recent exceptions have been special charter flights to Aqaba in Jordan and Cairo in Egypt. The trend towards charters led to entrepreneurs in the travel business capitalizing on the availability of this unique aircraft to fly passengers to the fascinating lunar-like desert landscapes of the region. With Aqaba Airport only a couple of hours' drive from Jordan's principal tourist attraction, Petra, it wasn't long before Concorde became a regular visitor to this ancient Hashemite kingdom. Worlds apart from the supersonic roar, the only way to access this ancient city is on foot or horse and cart. At the bottom of this narrow gorge, the jewel in Jordan's crown, the undisputed highlight of the trip, the magnificent treasury. Radiant in the morning sunshine, this spectacular structure was hewn from sandstone by the Nabateans, a nomadic Arabian group who ruled from the 6th century BC to 100 AD in a truly breathtaking setting. The A week later, another Concorde was back in the area, landing at Cairo's main airport, taking its group of passengers on a weekend trip to the last surviving 7 wonders of the world. The ancient pyramids built by the pharaohs, taking 20 years and 100,000 labourers to complete. Adding to this incredible spectacle, the Sphinx standing 66 feet tall and 240 feet long, representing the ancient sun god at dawn. With hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, tourism has become big business, with camel trains of foreign groups headed out to permanently erected Bedouin tents in the desert a mere few hundred yards from these wonders of the ancient world. After the short ride, the group were serenaded to their seats by a local brass band, requiring perhaps just that little bit of fine-tuning. Insomuch that Concorde is an aircraft that encompasses beauty with speed, so too were the extremes of the places it visited on such charters. Pre-Christmas trips to the Middle East were followed by day trips to Lapland and the Arctic Circle. By the late 1990s, scarcely a weekend went by without a Concorde charter off the beaten track. Increasingly, demand amongst the general population to experience supersonic flights was starting to be matched only by the desire among charterers to fly it to ever more far-reaching and unusual destinations. While enjoying a chilly meal by the campfire, Concorde approaches Rovaniemi, the setting sun providing a stunning backdrop. Within a couple of hours, these temporary Arctic explorers will be leaving this dramatic scenery for the return flight to London. As the temperature drops, flying in and out is not without problems, defrosting Concorde's wings to evicting stowaways who've decided that supersonic flight is somewhat superior to Rudolph and Sleigh.
Okay, everybody, let's go to London.
For some people, it's just the flight in itself. That was the be-all and end-all, and for that magic hour and a half, they'd be taken into another world. And most of them were really thrilled by the experience.
They were tremendously rewarding to fly. I mean, it was just wonderful to have them on board.
There's no doubt that charter passengers on Concorde almost feel as if they're going into some holy place. They've heard about Concorde, they've read about Concorde, they've seen Concorde, and now at last they're actually going to fly on Concorde, to experience this twice the speed of sound, this flying to the threshold of space where the atmospheric pressure is 1/10 of its value at sea level. And if you look carefully, you can just about see the curvature of the Earth.
Bournemouth's Herne Airport is one of the more regular haunts on the regional circuit. Bournemouth has seen Concorde charter flights to places as far afield as Pisa, Venice and Tenerife, as well as quick trips out over the Bay of Biscay and back in an hour and a half. These flights were not only rewarding for the passengers, but also proved an exciting day out for the crews, more used to the confines of one regular route to New York with generally disinterested passengers.
I think one of my abiding memories is flying an elderly lady. I think by elderly I mean seriously elderly. I think she was 101. She was over 100 anyway, and she had never flown in her life before. And she decided that before she died, she was jolly well going to have a flight to see what it was like. And she decided that if she was going to have a flight, it was going to be on Concorde, because that was the only way to do it. And she came on this flight, had a wonderful time, drank lots of champagne, and got off the airplane full of the joys of spring. She had an absolutely superb ride.
Often we'd have to fly around to get our weight down to a landing weight. So under the radar, control, we'd actually have a little bit of spare time to kill. So we'd probably fly along off the coast of Bournemouth before we were down to landing weight.
When a Concorde lands at Bournemouth, the event is normally marked with a vintage flypast from the local Jet Heritage Museum. But it's not only classic aircraft that hold a South Coast association with the supersonic jet airliner. Just along the coast at nearby Southampton, a number of Concorde passengers, having just arrived from London on the Orient Express, continue their journey to New York on the QE2 before returning to London a week later on Concorde. An irresistible combination.
Well, they're wonderful ways of transport. In fact, you can do all three. Go on the Orient Express to or from Southampton, to or from New York on the QE2, and to or from New York on the Concorde. And if you want to get three all inside a week, that must be the way to do it. I've been lucky enough to go on all three, and I wouldn't like to differentiate between them because I like all modes of transport. Some are just a bit quicker than others. I always think the QE2 is classic. It's like Concorde insofar as they came from a particular generation when you built and tested things very, very thoroughly. The QE2 will be able to encounter and overcome any weather that you could throw at it at sea. Good draft, very solid, built for the North Atlantic. And it's the same with the Concorde. It's a very robust aircraft. And I always think that they're two very, very special modes of transport specifically designed for that environment. So I think when you've done the two of them, you've probably experienced the ultimate in designer travel.
It's the ultimate irony that the passengers embarking on this voyage to New York will have paid much the same amount to take 6 days to get there as they will have done to return in only 3 hours on Concorde.
It's always appealed to everybody's sense of what an aeroplane should look like, and there's a theory that says it appeals to both sides of the brain, the scientific side and the artistic side. Concorde has always done that, and it's funny that it's rather like some other things in life, like steam trains. I'm particularly keen on railways and steam locomotives, and there seems to be a link between the way that those sort of things appeal and the way that Concorde appeals.
For those not able to afford the time or high price tag associated with an Orient Express QE2 and Concorde New York tour, there were always less costly and time-consuming alternatives available. Run by the pioneers of Concorde charter travel, a day trip through the Garden of England to Canterbury by the Orient Express, pulled by a steam engine, and returning on Concorde to the nearby Manston airfield, proved a popular alternative.
Manston's particularly interesting because we usually come in off the North Sea. We've taken off, gone up and done a loop around the North Sea, come back past North Foreland Lighthouse, and then approaching Manston, it looks very different because it's got a very wide runway. Some runways are shorter than the standard of 46 metres, and others are wider, and Manston, being an ex-military airfield, is actually considerably wider, so the perspective looks very different.
Ironically, Manston provides a constant reminder that in today's competitive aviation marketplace, aircraft that have outlived their usefulness are unceremoniously put out to grass. With greater scrutiny being placed on commercial viability, regional charters that use up valuable aircraft cycles could well prove to be a thing of the past. Even prior to the accident, BA was privately weighing up the financial returns of such trips, the key objective of preserving the fleet's life as long as possible for the core business route to New York. Ironically, the month of the Paris tragedy also saw some of the busiest regional charter programs in the UK in the aircraft's history. On the 3rd of July, Glasgow played host to a private charter from New York with a group of American golfers visiting Scotland for a week-long tour. With the evening backdrop of the hills around Loch Lomond as Concorde prepares to return empty to London, many BA staff in Glasgow were already asking themselves whether their airline's flagship would ever return north of the border. week later, Concorde was out on another UK regional tour, this time to the Midlands and North West.
Well, there's no question Concorde is an aircraft which turns the heads of people who have no need to fly on it. It's just almost a question of being part of a country which was capable of putting such a beautiful aircraft into the air.
Even on the very short 1.5 hour round the bay flights, we used to get all the passengers up during the course of the flight for a quick peek at the flight deck. And just to look at their faces and the sort of wonderment on their faces was tremendously rewarding.
People who had always wanted to do it, who now found themselves terminally ill. The group of people who'd had the same milkman for years and years and clubbed together to give him a ride with his wife. You can go on and on with people for whom it was really something very, very special.
It's absolutely remarkable. I mean, there's this airplane travelling faster than a rifle bullet on the edges of space, 23 miles a minute or something it's going at when it's going at top speed, and it feels as though you're hanging suspended in space. The only thing that tells you that you're moving is that occasionally when you're flying over the subsonic airplanes, you can see all these 747s 20,000 feet below you, almost appearing to go backwards. I mean, you are going 800 miles an hour or thereabouts faster than they are. The airplane was an absolute delight to fly. It handled beautifully. And remember, we're talking about an airplane that was being designed in the late 1950s, mid-1960s. I think it's absolutely amazing. And here we are now in the 21st century, and it remains unique.
After pulling in the crowds at Birmingham and Manchester, the aircraft's busy summer schedule turns to the southwest as another BA Concorde prepares to drop in and an air of anticipation builds amongst the spectators. With the airport laying on extra car parking in nearby fields and donating the proceeds to charity, It was clear that after 30 years in the air, this symbol of Anglo-French pride still turned heads.
When you're watching Concorde's approach, everybody's out there. They find a reason that they must be out on duty on that day, and everybody's straining to try and see it, the first landing light coming from the distance. And we're lucky because we have such a clear view. It's unrestricted, unlike some of the major airports where it probably gets lost with a lot of buildings and other things. From here you can see it, and you start to build up the adrenaline, and the excitement is phenomenal. It's quiet, and then all of a sudden the roar of Concorde, the adrenaline is bursting. It's amazing the amount of emotion it can give people.
It reminds me of a period early in my career when I was on the Viscounts, and we used to fly around the Scottish Islands and down to the Channel Islands and lots of other little airfields. And I think when you go to those places, it just gives you a feeling really of roots of serving communities. And certainly the flying is interesting, landing on the shorter runways and negotiating the tighter taxiways, and crowds of people there pressed up against the fence, and just the enthusiasm of the staff on the ground is another thing that really struck you.
With the pilots obviously enjoying themselves, raising and lowering the long droop nose in front of an adoring audience, this weekend provided an extra bonus. Concorde was to be outstationed for the whole 2 days.
Our normal operation would see flights to the Balearics, Canaries, Greece, Cyprus, and we do have a transatlantic flight to Canada, but it's not the same as Concorde. That has something so different. People talk about it forever after Concorde. It just means so much.
The same weekend, the airport was renamed Exeter International, with Concorde as the star guest of the show. But although both local press and public were out in force to mark the occasion, as ever, it was Concorde's presence that made the local headlines. The following day, even bigger queues had developed to try and catch a ride on the star attraction.
People will even turn up for a last-minute opportunity with a fistful of money because they're so desperate to get on Concorde when, of course, it's full and they've missed it, that they'll have to queue up for the next year. As soon as Concorde's been here, they're already looking at next year and so on, because they know that they've got an anniversary or a birthday or something or other they want to celebrate. So they're all so keen, and once they've seen it at Exeter, it means so much more. Whether it's coming in or going out, it has a thrill for everybody to say, well, I've been on that, I've been on Concorde. To them, it's only up the road that it was built. So many people who've travelled to see it have worked on it in the past. We have a lot of people who were engineers, or they did something with regard to the start-up of Concorde, and so they have an allegiance towards it and just love to watch it come in, and they've always got a story to tell when they worked on it. And so they feel it's very much part of the West Country, although we're at the Southwest. It's still the West Country, and it's our aeroplane, really.
For the crews, charters represent something out of the ordinary, and it's this sense of adventure that proves attractive. However, the window of opportunity for new pilots to sign up to this exclusive club comes up rarely.
I think generally they're real enthusiasts. There are a number of reasons for this. Partly because of the limited route structure in everyday life, partly because they have to stay on the aircraft for a number of years, so their career opportunities may be curtailed in the meantime. And I think it's pretty true to say that all the time I've been on the aircraft, all the people who've come on it or wanted to come on it have been very, very keen to do so. They're not put off by the fact that probably 3/4 of their trips will be to New York. They just want to get on the aircraft.
There we were, ordinary pilots flying, having the luck to fly such an extraordinary aircraft, such an interesting aircraft, such a historic aircraft, at the same time as being way ahead of its time, in its time. Quite extraordinary.
It's an airplane that captures the imagination and the heart of any pilot or flight engineer.
But there's also that great feeling that you're amongst a small group of people, by necessity, because we don't need that many crews. It's rather like playing regularly in a sports team. You build up a good feeling of camaraderie and general interest and enthusiasm.
I think the hardest thing is that every sense is assailed by flying this aeroplane. I think that what the simulator can't prepare you for is the noise, the acceleration, the fact that absolutely every sense is overloaded. It's a wonderful machine, and it's very difficult not to sound trite. It's a superlative aeroplane, and the only words you can use to describe it are superlatives, really.
It's not just enthusiasm, it's passion. The passion that the flight crew have for flying this beautiful aircraft. We love taking her across the Atlantic, doing what she was designed to do, flying business people faster than the Earth rotates. Arriving in New York, which has become a second home. Most of us do our city living there. Some sail, some go to the theatre, many have friends. A real opportunity to get away from it all. But in the winter, when it's cold there, we really value flying Concorde on the other scheduled route to Barbados. To New York, we see the same faces day in and day out. 80% of them are business people, 80% are repeat customers. We often see the same faces together with their families going down to Barbados for that wonderful winter holiday. But also other folks who've saved up all of their earnings to have that very special, once-in-a-lifetime break on this beautiful island in the Caribbean. The flight crew love it, the cabin crew love it. We get away from the winter to the glorious summer sun.
After the onboard haute cuisine, passengers wait for the opportunity to visit the flight deck, a practice now sadly curtailed since the events of September the 11th. Flying at Mach 2, as the aircraft heads south towards the tropics and the air warms at lower altitude, so the reverse happens in the stratosphere, assisting Concorde to increase her rate of time. Shortly before the descent into Barbados, Concorde levels off at 60,000 feet, her maximum altitude, as John Tye dials up the initial descent level. Behind the pilots, flight engineer Ian Kirby monitors the fuel situation, crucial for balancing the weight of the aircraft prior to landing. After lowering the visor and selecting the nose to its initial landing position during the descent, Concorde passes over the northeast coast of the island. Shortly, she turns south along the west coast, 1,500 feet above the Caribbean Sea, passing the chain of luxury hotels scattered along its popular sandy beaches.
Beware Concorde 273 is clear to land on QNH 1016 millibars. The surface wind is 085 at 2 knots.
Beware Concorde 273, we're clear to land on runway 09.
At the island's Grantley Adams International Airport, the returning passengers, many of whom have flown out subsonic on the Jumbo, are looking forward to their journey home on Concorde as they check in. As two of the three flight deck crew check in, today's captain, Roger Mills, is busy checking load sheets and passenger lists in the BA office prior to the 4,000-mile return to London. Outside, it's all actions as the catering is loaded at the front end and the local BA ground engineers give the aircraft the routine once-over, while seemingly every possible member of BA ground staff swarm around the aircraft like bees at a honeypot. At the back, the passengers' baggage is being loaded into the hold. Concorde operates at the very limit of her range between Barbados and London, so fuel tanks are fully topped up before departure to reduce the need for a fuel stop. Meanwhile, the cabin crew board to ensure that everything is neat and tidy for the passengers. On the ground, loading the passengers is not a quick and easy affair, as everybody seems to want to take that souvenir photograph on the tarmac before they take their seats.
Seabird Concorde 272, runway new 09, QNH 1015 millibars, temperature 30, the wind is 090 degrees, 10 knots, and the time 27.
Roger 1015, and the weather cockpit, Seabird 272, just starting engines now.
On the flight deck, Captain Roger Mills on the left and Senior First Officer Dave Bias make final preparations for the flight back to London. Departure is from the easterly runway, out towards Barbados's southeast coastline.
Concorde 272 is now cleared for takeoff. The wind is 090 degrees, 10 knots. Take off on 272.
3, 2, 1, now. V1. Rotate. V2. Positive flag. Gear up.
After a couple of hours of sustained supersonic flying, Concorde continues to head along its special supersonic track, heading northeastwards past the Azores. As he looks out of the cockpit window, Captain Roger Mills was well aware that the sun would soon be setting on his Concorde career. In New York in October 2002, the local BA crew had prepared a send-off for Captain Les Scott, affectionately known as the Silver Fox, prior to his last ever Concorde flight to London. As the passengers were largely oblivious to this symbolic moment, Captain Scott's family were the last aboard the aircraft to accompany him on his last emotional trip home.
I'll come off on camera.
As appropriately the unofficial flagship of the flagships, aircraft GBOAC, pushes back, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey had laid on its own tribute to this popular senior training captain, who'd been responsible for training his own co-pilot, Les Evans. In a considered moment, Captain Scott decided not to subject this Concorde to the effects of a multicoloured fountain, even his last flight. For BA's retiring pilots at the age of 55, leaving the Concorde fleet to the newcomers leads to mixed emotions.
I spent 15 years on that aeroplane and I never once drove up to Heathrow feeling that I wished I wasn't doing it. There was always that eager anticipation that I was about to get back into the flight deck of my favourite aeroplane. I mean, I've flown well over 70 different types of airplanes, including helicopters and seaplanes and all sorts of things. And there is nothing that compares with Concorde. It comes into a very special category. It's the Grand Prix racing car, the Epsom Derby winner of the flying world, without any doubt at all. I think it was Sir Hugh Casson, the British architect, who described Concorde as a piece of 20th century sculpture. And I think that describes it very neatly, actually. And it is, in a sense, the fusion of art and technology in an absolutely sublime way.
How did you feel on your last flight when you landed back at Heathrow?
Absolutely devastated. Awful feeling. Knew it was coming. I mean, you know you're going to be retiring, but there you go.
When we got out to the aircraft in the morning, it was a lovely New York morning, as only those mornings can be. Fresh, lovely bright blue sky, and a smashing flight back. Smooth flying conditions, wonderful visibility, and came back to London also on a lovely, clear, calm evening. And I thought, if you've got to finish, that's the way to do it. Quick kick of the tyres when you leave, and then the realisation you're not going to do it again.
It's a dreadful feeling, that last flight. I really had withdrawal symptoms for, I don't know, a year, 18 months. And eventually I sort of had to pull myself together and say, come on, Hutchinson, there are other things to do. And another life to be got on with. But, you know, initially, for the first year or so, I really was a very grumpy old man.
I made a decision not to fly commercially again because I didn't feel that anything was going to be as good as the previous 13 years, and it's a decision I haven't regretted.
For Jeff Mussett, retirement was perfectly timed, just after flying the ultimate route on the ultimate aircraft, a trip travelling at twice the speed of sound around the world. This late 1999 modern-day aviation adventure, chartered by a group of wealthy Americans, is almost certainly never to be repeated. After being carefully groomed for this trip of a lifetime, this BA Concorde was backed out of the hangar at Heathrow for the start of this epic voyage. After picking up the passengers in New York and flying supersonic over the frozen wastes of northern Canada, the first stop was Vancouver to refuel. As Concorde approaches the first stop away from her normal London-New York routine for the first time on this trip, the logistical complications became apparent. Special engineers and ground staff had to be placed, as well as a resident on-board engineer who travelled with spanner in hand at the back of the plane.
The problem with an aircraft like Concorde is that, unlike a 747, we don't maintain stocks of spares around the world. We have to take engineers as spares with us. But contrary to that, because one stops for 2 or 3 days, everywhere in the world is within reach of getting a spare to the aircraft.
After literally an hour on Canadian soil, Concorde heads for Hawaii. To cross the Pacific at Mach 2 is hugely deceptive, with the vast tracts of ocean gobbled up in a matter of only a few hours. Destinations ahead included Fiji, Sydney, Bangkok, Madras, Nairobi, Petra and Venice. In a matter of 3 weeks, staying in the world's most luxurious hotels, the holidaymakers on this flight would not spend $80,000 per person to travel on anything less than Concorde. On board, the service was exemplary.
I think the beauty of a round-the-world trip like that is that you start at a sensible time in the morning. So you've had breakfast, you have a pleasant lunch, and then by the time that's cleared away, you're landing, and you still feel fresh, and you've covered 3,500 miles.
These sun-drenched beaches are about as far from Heathrow as you can get.
Fiji was fascinating because, again, crossed a large segment of the Pacific Ocean in a short time and gone from American culture down into the South Seas. And it must have been wonderful to have seen the aircraft arrive against the backdrop of the beaches and the palm trees. And flying in, of course, we got exactly the reverse insofar as we were looking out from our little world down onto this palm-fringed paradise.
Although this unique trip broke several world speed records, back home at Heathrow the BA policy was shifting. No longer would the charterers be given carte blanche to hire the aircraft, as preservation became the new priority. In order to protect the airframes for the core New York service for as long as possible, extensive maintenance was being undertaken on the entire fleet to keep them in perfect order. Following the Paris crash and the subsequent grounding of both airlines' fleets, both BA and Air France had the perfect excuse to retire the entire fleet of aircraft on the grounds of cost. But to the surprise of some, while record-breaking trips around the world are confined to the record books, the future for this 1960s needle-nosed aircraft was looking up.
Anybody who's in business knows that you have to keep reviewing your business plans, and at some time, rather like all of us with an old car perhaps, you decide that the time has come to buy a new one or to undertake the major capital expenditure to put a new engine or whatever you want to do with it. And I think that had been an ongoing process. This obviously refocused it. The aircraft is expensive to maintain and keep running. It requires a lot of engineering man-hours, and that argument was probably finely balanced. And obviously the decision was made to actually go ahead, which I think is a great vote of confidence, because I think it was a hard-nosed decision. I don't think it was done out of sentiment. I think the belief was there that it could continue to make money if it came back in service.
Concorde has inspired so many of the people who've been lucky enough to either work on her, fly with her, or simply watch her as she soars majestically through the skies. Even after 3 decades in service, she still conjures up a sense of pride and fond affection. People still look up whenever and wherever she takes to the skies. Her ability to fly faster than a rifle bullet at twice the speed of sound, faster than the Earth rotates, brings Britain and France together with America in a matter of a few hours. As this Concorde approaches Heathrow Airport on a cold winter's evening from Barbados, it's hard to believe that a few hours before, her passengers were basking in the Caribbean winter sunshine. For most of these passengers, like thousands before them, the experience of flying on Concorde will be with them forever.